Your neural architecture is not destiny. It is clay that hardens only when you stop molding it. Most people believe their brain is a fixed vessel filled by experience, but neuroscience reveals the opposite. Your brain is a prediction machine constantly rewriting its own code based on where you direct attention. In 2026, the margin between those who dominate and those who disappear will not be talent or luck, but neuroplastic discipline. The 10 habits you are about to install operate below the level of conscious thought, restructuring your default mode network, strengthening your anterior cingulate cortex, and eliminating the neural pathways of victimhood before they can fire. This is not self-help. This is neural engineering. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, but he lived in an age without understanding of synaptic pruning. Today we know that every thought either fortifies or atrophies specific neural connections. When you repeat a pattern, you are not just behaving. You are voting with your biology for a specific version of yourself. The Stoics called this prohairesis, the faculty of choice that defines moral character. Modern psychology calls it self-authorship. We call it unstoppable success. Success is not a destination you reach, but an identity you inhabit so completely that failure becomes neurologically impossible. Over the next hour, you will not learn tips or tricks. You will undergo a systematic rewiring of your basal ganglia, the habit formation center that operates when willpower fails. You will learn to weaponize your dopamine circuits instead of being enslaved by them. You will master the ancient art of premeditatio malorum, not as pessimism, but as strategic advantage. You will build what the Spartans called rothos, the unshakable character that persists when motivation evaporates. This journey demands your full cognitive engagement. Put your device on airplane mode. Close the door. The world of distraction ends now. We begin with the foundational truth that everything you have been taught about habits is incomplete. Atomic changes do not create atomic results. Identity-level transformations do. When you change who you believe you are at the neural level, behavioral change becomes automatic rather than forced. Your first installation begins not with action, but with perception, the Stoic discipline that separates external events from internal judgments, creating the gap where power lives. Most people react to reality as if it were commands carved in stone, but the wise separate the signal from the noise, recognizing that no event contains inherent meaning until they assign it. This separation is the prerequisite for all subsequent transformation, and mastering it requires understanding that your interpretation of events is more important than the events themselves. The year 2026 represents a unique inflection point in human history, where artificial intelligence has commoditized average performance, making exceptional cognitive and emotional regulation the only remaining competitive advantages. Those who have not optimized their neural operating systems will find themselves automated into obsolescence, while those who have installed these habits will discover that the chaos of the modern world serves as fuel for their ambitions rather than obstacles to them. You are choosing to become part of the latter group, to join the small percentage of humanity that consciously directs its own evolution rather than being swept along by the currents of circumstance. This choice is not made once, but is proven through the daily discipline of perceptual sovereignty, which we will now install as the foundation of a new architecture. You must understand that the brain you have today is the result of every choice you have made, every thought you have entertained, and every emotional response you have indulged over the past decades. It is a faithful record of your priorities, and if you do not like what you see in your external world, you must begin by changing the internal landscape that projects it. The default mode network, responsible for your sense of self and your habitual patterns of thought, can be completely reconfigured through consistent practice, but this requires that you first break the identification with your current mental chatter. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts arise, and this distinction, once felt at the visceral level rather than merely understood intellectually, liberates you from the tyranny of reaction. From this place of witness consciousness, you can observe events without being contaminated by them, seeing clearly what is actually happening rather than what your fears and projections suggest is happening. This clarity is the ultimate power, the ability to respond to reality as it is rather than reacting to your interpretation of it. And it forms the bedrock upon which we will construct the 9 remaining pillars of your unstoppable success. The first habit is the disciplined separation of stimulus from response. a practice that requires you to install a gap between what happens to you and what you make it mean. Most humans operate on a direct line from external event to emotional reaction, allowing their neurochemistry to be determined by forces outside their control. You must break this circuit by intercepting every input with a question: what does this mean, and is that meaning serving my highest purpose? When you encounter resistance, betrayal, failure, or unexpected catastrophe, your trained response must be immediate extraction of value rather than victimhood. You look for the lesson hidden in the obstacle, the opportunity disguised as defeat, the strength forged by the very difficulty that would break others. This is not positive thinking. It is perceptual dominance, the refusal to grant any external event the power to disturb your inner equilibrium without your permission. You train this capacity through daily cold exposure to discomfort. Not necessarily physical, though that helps, but through the deliberate seeking of perspectives that challenge your ego. You read the criticisms you would rather ignore, you examine the failures you would rather forget, and you ask what they reveal about your blind spots rather than how they wound your pride. This builds the neural muscle of cognitive reappraisal, where the prefrontal cortex regulates the amygdala's panic signals, preventing the cortisol cascades that destroy decision-making capacity. You begin each morning by predicting the frustrations you will face, meeting them in advance with the decision to remain sovereign, to maintain your center regardless of the chaos that swirls around you. This preconditioning of your nervous system creates a stability that others perceive as almost supernatural, an unflappability in crisis that marks you as a leader worth following. The practice extends to your internal dialogue, where you must catch every self-limiting narrative the moment it arises and replace it with a script aligned with your capable identity. When you think, "I cannot handle this," you immediately interrupt and assert, "I am handling this, and I will extract maximum value from the effort." The discipline, recognizing that perfection is impossible, but direction is everything. As you master this perceptual alchemy, you will discover that your environment seems to change, presenting fewer obstacles and more opportunities, not through magical thinking, but because your reticular activating system now filters for possibilities rather than threats. You have tuned your instrument to a different frequency, and the music of the world changes to match your vibration. This newfound stability creates the foundation necessary for the next phase of your evolution, where you will intentionally subject yourself to stresses that forge anti-fragility. Once you have established perceptual sovereignty, you must weaponize it through the systematic embrace of voluntary discomfort, the practice that transforms your nervous system from fragile to anti-fragile. Seneca advised spending days in poverty to inoculate against fear, not because deprivation is virtuous, but because comfort is a slow poison that atrophies the will. Your brain is designed for conservation of energy, always pushing you toward the path of least resistance. But this biological laziness creates a prison of anxiety. When you voluntarily embrace cold, hunger, physical exertion beyond comfort, or social rejection, you signal to your survival mechanisms that you are the source of danger, not the victim of it. This triggers hormesis, the biological principle where stressors below the threshold of harm create adaptive growth. Each cold shower, each fasted morning, each difficult conversation chosen rather than avoided, myelinates the neural pathways of courage. You are literally insulating the circuits that govern bold action, making future bravery chemically easier. This is not random masochism, but calculated anti-fragility. You identify your psychological comfort zones and collapse them intentionally. If you fear criticism, you publish the work. If you fear poverty, you practice deprivation. If you fear solitude, you isolate until you crave your own company. The Stoics called this premeditatio futurorum, the preparation for all possible futures through present adversity. Modern behavioral psychology calls it fear extinction through exposure. Both recognize that courage is not the absence of fear, but the habit of acting despite it, etched into your striatum through repetition. Start with the body because it is the most accessible domain of voluntary hardship. The body keeps score of every evasion, storing tension in the fascia, restricting breath in the chest, creating a physiology of withdrawal. When you train the body to remain calm and cold, strong in fatigue, steady in pain, you create a neurochemical template that transfers to business, relationships, and creative endeavors. The ancient Greeks understood this through the concept of ascesis, physical training for spiritual character. You will implement this by selecting one daily discomfort that makes you slightly uncomfortable and executing it with religious precision. Do not vary the timing. Do not wait for motivation. The power lies in the ritual, the unbroken chain of days that proves to your subconscious that you're not your sensations. You are the witness who chooses action despite them. As this habit solidifies, you will notice that problems previously paralyzing now appear trivial because your stress threshold has been recalibrated upward. You have built what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility, the capacity to gain from disorder, to thrive in volatility, to become stronger through shocks rather than merely surviving them. This recalibration extends beyond the physical into the psychological realm, where you deliberately seek out intellectual challenges that expose the gaps in your understanding, forcing you to admit ignorance and reconstruct your models of reality. You engage with ideas that contradict your worldview, not to win arguments, but to stress test your beliefs against the strongest possible opposition. This cognitive discomfort prevents the calcification of ideology that traps most adults in intellectual adolescence. You also practice social discomfort by initiating conversations with strangers, speaking truth in moments where silence would be safer, and setting boundaries that disappoint others but protect your integrity. Each of these voluntary stresses strengthens your social and emotional musculature, creating a resilience that others mistake for natural confidence. The key distinction here is between voluntary and involuntary suffering. When hardship is chosen, you retain agency, and this agency prevents the learned helplessness that destroys so many when fate inevitably delivers its unchosen blows. You are training yourself to be the oak that bends in the storm rather than the glass that shatters. And this training requires that you stop interpreting discomfort as a signal to stop and instead recognize it as proof that you are expanding your capabilities. Over time, this orientation toward challenge becomes your default setting, and you will find yourself gravitating toward difficult projects, complex problems, and ambitious goals that terrify your former self. This attraction to difficulty is the hallmark of the master, the sign that you have transcended the need for ease and embraced the growth that only resistance can provide. As this second habit becomes automatic, you must turn your attention to the deepest layer of your programming, the identity structures that determine which discomforts you are even willing to consider. This leads directly into the third habit, ontological reconstruction, the systematic demolition and rebuilding of your self-concept at the neural level. Your current results are simply the printout of your subconscious identity script. You cannot outperform your self-concept because the reticular activating system in your brain filters reality to match your beliefs, deleting opportunities that contradict your current identity while highlighting evidence of your limitations. James Clear popularized the idea that every action is a vote for the type of person you believe you are, but he stopped short of the demolition required for quantum leaps. You are not merely casting votes for a better version. You are staging a coup against your former self. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus was born a slave, yet rewrote his identity so completely that he became the teacher of emperors. He understood that the only true possession is your prohairesis, your capacity to choose your character regardless of external station. To implement this, you must write a new identity narrative so vivid that it triggers the same neurochemical responses as lived experience. You visualize not the outcomes you want, but the actions you take, creating mirror neuron activation that pre-wires the circuits for competence. You speak of yourself in the language of inevitability, not aspiration. Not "I'm trying to be successful," but "I'm the architect of empires." Not "I hope to be disciplined," but "I am the sort of person who executes regardless of mood." This is not affirmation. It is auto-hypnosis through repetition until the anterior cingulate cortex accepts the new pattern as baseline reality. You must ruthlessly eliminate every behavior that contradicts this new identity, for the brain cannot hold two conflicting self-concepts simultaneously without cognitive dissonance that destroys willpower. If you declare yourself healthy yet smoke, if you claim sovereignty yet hit snooze, you fracture your neural integrity and leak power. The habit requires absolute congruence between your declared identity and your microscopic actions, building what the Greeks called harmonia, the integration of all parts toward a single aim. This identity shift creates a phenomenon that psychologists call identity protective cognition, where your brain now works tirelessly to maintain consistency with your new self-concept, automatically rejecting choices that would betray the character you have claimed. You become incapable of mediocrity not through force of will, but through the structural impossibility of violating your own nature. To facilitate this transformation, you must create what researchers call implementation intentions, specific if-then protocols that automate behavior aligned with your new identity. You do not say, "I will work out more." You say, "When the alarm rings at 5, I am the type of person who rises immediately and trains." This specificity preloads the decision, reducing the cognitive load required to act and preventing the hesitation that allows resistance to take hold. You also engage in symbolic self-completion, acquiring the artifacts, clothing, and tools associated with your desired identity not as consumerism, but as environmental cues that reinforce the neural pathways you are building. The writer buys the fountain pen, the athlete invests in the professional shoes, the entrepreneur incorporates the business before she feels ready. These external validations serve as anchors for the internal transformation, creating a feedback loop where behavior shapes identity and identity shapes behavior. You must also perform regular identity audits, examining your behaviors over the past week to determine whether they align with the person you claim to be becoming. Where you find deviation, you do not indulge in shame, but in surgical correction, removing the environmental triggers or planning failures that led to the misalignment. This process is continuous and ruthless, for identity is not a destination, but a maintenance program, a daily recommitment to the character you're building. As this reconstruction solidifies, you will notice that decisions become easier because you're no longer choosing between options, but simply acting in accordance with who you are. The friction of decision-making dissolves, replaced by the momentum of inevitable action. And this momentum carries you into the fourth domain of optimization, where we confront the fragility of your attention in a world designed to fracture it. With your identity reconstructed, you must now address the war for your attention that rages silently in the digital economy, because your ability to focus has become the scarcest and most valuable resource in the modern world. The fourth habit is cognitive monasticism, the deliberate creation of attentional sanctuaries in an age of infinite distraction. Your brain's dopaminergic system has been hijacked by algorithms designed to trigger variable reward schedules identical to slot machines, creating neural pathways of craving that destroy your capacity for deep work. Every notification, every scroll, every multitasking moment fractures your prefrontal cortex's ability to sustain concentration, creating what neuroscientists call continuous partial attention, a state of constant low-grade anxiety masquerading as productivity. You must implement radical stimulus control. This means designing environments where distraction is physically impossible rather than merely discouraged. You eliminate the smartphone from your workspace, not through willpower, but through absence. You create deep work blocks where your brain knows, at the neural level, that no interruption will arrive, allowing the default mode network to quiet and the task-positive network to dominate. This is Stoic pro-soak, attention to the present moment, weaponized for economic and creative dominance. The practice requires that you retrain your dopamine receptors through fasting, abstaining from cheap digital rewards until your baseline sensitivity resets, and simple tasks once again produce satisfaction. You will experience withdrawal symptoms because you are literally detoxifying from neurochemical addiction. But this pain marks the death of impulsive reactivity and the birth of sovereign attention. When you reclaim your focus, you gain the superpower of rapid skill acquisition, because myelin, the neural insulator that creates expertise, only forms through sustained, undistracted practice. You must recognize that every moment spent in shallow work is a moment stolen from the deep architecture of your potential, a form of self-sabotage more insidious than overt failure, because it wears the mask of effort. The brain does not distinguish between digital input and physical threat. Both trigger norepinephrine and cortisol cascades that erode the hippocampus and prevent memory consolidation. When you allow constant connectivity, you are not merely wasting time. You're physically shrinking the brain regions responsible for spatial reasoning and emotional regulation. The habit of cognitive monasticism requires that you treat your attention as a finite currency, spending it only on assets that appreciate in value, while ruthlessly cutting expenses that depreciate your neural net worth. You create sacred hours where you disappear from the grid, entering states of flow where time dilates and creativity spikes because your brain finally feels safe enough to explore the unknown. This safety is what the nervous system craves above all else, and by guaranteeing it through environmental design, you bypass the amygdala's threat detection and access the prefrontal cortex's executive functions at full capacity. You will measure your progress not by hours worked, but by depth achieved, tracking the quality of your attention the way a monk tracks prayer beads. This discipline creates what psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi identified as flow states, the optimal experience of human existence, where challenge matches skill and the self disappears into the task. In these states, you are not rewiring your brain. You are performing neurosurgery without anesthesia, cutting away the tumor of distraction while installing the circuitry of mastery. The transformation is violent in its effectiveness, creating a mind that others experience as almost intimidating in its clarity and presence. You become the person who listens completely, who thinks completely, who creates completely, because you have reclaimed the fragments of yourself that were scattered across 1,000 digital distractions. This monastic discipline naturally extends into your emotional life, requiring you to become strategically indifferent to the opinions and demands that typically derail high performers. Which brings us to the fifth domain of your reconstruction. The fifth habit is the premeditation of adversity, not as pessimistic dwelling, but as emotional inoculation that prevents reactive sabotage. Marcus Aurelius begins his meditations by reminding himself of the frustrating nature of the people he will encounter, inoculating himself against irritation before it arises. This practice, premeditatio malorum, trains your anterior cingulate cortex to anticipate challenges without triggering the amygdala's panic response. When you vividly imagine worst-case scenarios while maintaining physiological calm, you create a neural pathway between potential threat and rational response, preventing the hijacking that destroys negotiations, relationships, and strategic thinking. You practice this through daily visualization of specific failures, rehearsing your emotional and tactical response until equanimity becomes your default setting. This is not negative thinking. It is strategic anti-fragility applied to the emotional domain. You identify your triggers, the specific interpersonal dynamics or setbacks that typically provoke rage, despair, or anxiety, and you script new responses that align with your chosen identity. When the actual event occurs, your brain recognizes the pattern and executes the pre-planned subroutine rather than the primitive fight-or-flight response. You must practice this viscerally, not as mere intellectual exercise, but as full-body rehearsal, feeling the disappointment, the shame, the financial loss in your nervous system while maintaining the discipline of your breath and the clarity of your purpose. This trains your vagal tone, the measure of your parasympathetic nervous system's ability to calm the heart and clear the mind under stress. High vagal tone correlates with leadership effectiveness, emotional intelligence, and physical health, making this habit not merely philosophical but biological optimization. Without this premeditation, you remain a puppet of circumstance, reacting to the moves of others with predictable emotional patterns that sophisticated competitors can easily manipulate. The Stoics understood that most suffering is anticipatory, created by the imagination rather than reality, and by draining these future fears of their power through vivid confrontation, you reclaim the energy wasted on hypothetical catastrophes. You develop what the samurai called Mizu no Kokoro, the mind like water, which reflects reality exactly as it is without distortion, rippling only when necessary and returning immediately to stillness. This state is not mystical, but mechanical, the result of specific neural training protocols that separate stimulus from response. You will notice that as this habit solidifies, your decisions improve not marginally, but exponentially, because you are no longer making choices from a place of chemical chaos and cortisol intoxication, but from the crystalline clarity of prefrontal dominance. This clarity reveals that your emotional reactivity has been the primary obstacle to your success, not external circumstances or lack of opportunity. You begin to view emotional storms as information rather than identity, as weather patterns passing through the sky of consciousness rather than defining the atmosphere itself. This detachment allows you to process negative experiences with such efficiency that they transform into data rather than trauma, into lessons rather than wounds. The practice extends to your relationships, where you anticipate the conflicts, betrayals, and disappointments inherent in human interaction, preparing yourself to respond with grace rather than retaliation. You do not become cynical through this practice. You become unshakeable, capable of maintaining your center and your kindness even when others behave at their worst. This emotional invincibility creates the stability necessary for the next level of mental mastery, where you learn to separate yourself from the content of your thoughts entirely, achieving a freedom that transcends even the most disciplined emotional regulation. This clarity naturally evolves into the sixth habit, cognitive diffusion, the creation of space between your thoughts and your actions. Most people are slaves to their internal monologue, believing every fear-based narrative their mind generates is reality. Neuroscience reveals that thoughts are simply electrochemical events, no more inherently true than radiostatic. Yet most individuals organize their entire lives around these random firings. You must install a watcher, a metacognitive observer that sees thoughts as weather patterns passing through the sky of consciousness without allowing them to become storms that destroy the landscape. This requires daily meditation, not for relaxation, but for separation, building the muscle of noticing without engaging. When you can observe, I am having the thought that I will fail, rather than I will fail, you have created the gap where free will actually lives. This gap, measured in milliseconds but expanded through practice, is the difference between unconscious reaction and conscious creation. You train this by labeling emotions with linguistic precision, engaging the prefrontal cortex to dampen the limbic system through what neuroscientists call affect labeling. Instead of I am angry, I'm experiencing heat in my chest and the urge to dominate. This linguistic shift moves the experience from identity to observation, from permanent to temporary, from catastrophic to manageable. The practice extends to your decision-making processes, where you learn to recognize the difference between intuitive wisdom and anxious noise, between genuine insight and compulsive worry. You begin to treat your thoughts as suggestions rather than commands, as hypotheses to be tested rather than facts to be obeyed. This liberation from mental slavery is profound, for it reveals that you are not the voice in your head, but the silence in which the voice arises. With this separation established, you gain the ability to choose which thoughts to fuel with attention and which to allow to dissipate, effectively curating your mental environment with the same ruthlessness you apply to your physical space. You recognize that attention is the scarcest resource, and that feeding every thought that appears is equivalent to scattering your inheritance on trivialities. This discernment allows you to maintain creative focus in the face of internal criticism, to take bold action despite the presence of fear, and to remain present with others without being pulled into ruminative loops about past or future. The Stoics practice this through the discipline of prosoke, attention to the present moment, but modern neuroscience confirms that this is not merely spiritual preference, but cognitive optimization, the only state in which the prefrontal cortex operates at full capacity. When you're lost in thought, you're literally lost, operating on autopilot while the machinery of your mind runs outdated programs installed by childhood, conditioning, and cultural osmosis. Cognitive diffusion wakes you from this trance, returning you to the only moment in which life actually occurs and decisions actually matter. You develop the capacity to hold contradictory thoughts without anxiety, to sit with uncertainty without rushing to false closure, and to tolerate the ambiguity that precedes all creative breakthroughs. This mental flexibility becomes your greatest asset in complex environments where rigid thinking leads to obsolescence. As you master this habit, you will find that your internal world becomes quiet, spacious, and powerful, a foundation of sanity in an insane world. This internal order naturally demands external alignment, requiring you to structure your physical and social environment to support this new clarity, which brings us to the seventh pillar of your neural architecture. The seventh habit is radical environmental design, the acknowledgement that behavior is largely determined by context rather than character. Willpower is a depleting resource, a muscle that fatigues with use, making it an unreliable foundation for long-term success. You must instead engineer your physical and digital environments so that desired actions become the path of least resistance and undesired actions require Herculean effort. This means automating your finances so saving happens before you see the money, removing unhealthy food from your home so willpower is never tested, placing your gym clothes beside your bed so exercise becomes automatic, and creating friction for distractions by logging out of social media accounts and burying your phone in another room. Your basal ganglia seeks efficiency above all else by making bad habits inconvenient and good habits inevitable. You harness this biological laziness for virtuous ends. This extends beyond the physical to the digital architecture of your devices, where you eliminate notifications, remove addictive apps, and create dedicated hardware for deep work that contains no entertainment capacity. You must treat your environment as an extension of your nervous system, recognizing that your brain did not evolve to distinguish between self and surrounding, but rather takes cues from the space it inhabits. When your desk is cluttered, your mind is cluttered. When your bedroom is optimized for sleep, your circadian rhythm synchronizes naturally. When your kitchen contains only whole foods, your diet improves without struggle. This is not weakness, but wisdom, the recognition that you are a biological organism responding to stimuli, and that controlling the stimuli is more efficient than fighting the response. You must extend this architecture to your information diet, because the thoughts you consume become the thoughts you produce, and most modern media is designed to trigger cortisol and dopamine spikes that keep you in a state of anxious consumption rather than calm creation. You eliminate news that you cannot personally influence, gossip that serves no strategic purpose, and entertainment that normalizes values contrary to your declared identity. Your inputs must be as carefully curated as a museum collection, each piece selected for its ability to expand your perspective, deepen your wisdom, or sharpen your capabilities. When you control your environment with this level of precision, you stop experiencing decision fatigue because the architecture makes decisions for you. The coffee maker is programmed, the workout clothes are laid out, the deep work block is scheduled, the healthy meal is prepped, your willpower is preserved for the creative and strategic challenges that actually require it. This conservation of cognitive resources is what allows you to maintain consistency over months and years, while others burn out from the exhaustion of constant self-regulation. You become the architect of your own defaults, the programmer of your own autopilot, ensuring that when you are tired, stressed, or distracted, your environment carries you toward your goals rather than away from them. This environmental mastery creates the stability necessary to address the social dimension of your ecology, where the people surrounding you exert gravitational forces on your behavior that you ignore at your peril. This recognition that context shapes consciousness is the bridge to understanding that your social environment requires the same ruthless engineering as your physical space. This brings us to the eighth habit, Strategic social curation, the deliberate construction of your social ecosystem to enforce excellence through proximity. Jim Rohn's assertion that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with understates the reality. You are actually the average of the 5 people you pay the most attention to, including digital influences. Your mirror neurons automatically mimic the emotional states, belief systems, and behavioral patterns of those in your proximity, a process that occurs below conscious awareness and shapes your identity without permission. You must audit your social circle with the ruthlessness of a CEO, firing incompetent employees, severing ties with those who normalize mediocrity, complain without solution, or drain your cognitive resources with drama. This is not cruelty, it is survival. The Stoics practiced hikousios apochi, voluntary withdrawal from the corrupting influence of the masses, recognizing that most people are committed to their own limitations and will defend them aggressively when confronted by your growth. You must create what psychologists call an identity alliance, a tribe of individuals committed to mutual elevation, where excellence is the baseline expectation and accountability is automatic. This requires approaching relationships as investments rather than entertainments, calculating the return on attention for every interaction. You limit exposure to those operating below your desired frequency, while increasing immersion in environments where your current goals are already someone else's baseline reality. If you cannot physically access such a tribe, you create it through deliberate study of biographies, mentorship through books, and virtual proximity to high performers who speak directly into your consciousness through audio. Your brain cannot distinguish between a physical mentor and a vividly imagined one. Both create similar neural imprinting. By controlling these environmental variables, you stop fighting yourself and start surfing the wave of contextual pressure toward inevitable success. You must become comfortable with the loneliness of the high performer, recognizing that as you ascend, the air becomes thinner and few can breathe at those altitudes. This is the price of greatness, gladly paid by those who understand that temporary isolation is preferable to permanent mediocrity. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote that you should seek out good company because virtue is contagious, and modern research confirms that behaviors spread through social networks up to 3 degrees of separation. Your choice of spouse, friends, and colleagues determines not just your mood, but your income, your health outcomes, and your lifespan, making social selection literally a matter of life and death. You must develop scripts for handling the inevitable resistance from those who feel threatened by your evolution, learning to set boundaries without burning bridges unless absolutely necessary. You create systems for declining invitations that do not serve your mission, for extracting yourself from conversations that normalize victimhood, and for redirecting energy from maintaining appearances to mastering your craft. This social architecture extends to the digital realm, where you unfollow, unsubscribe, and block with impunity, curating your information feed so that it reflects the reality you're creating rather than the chaos the algorithms wish to sell you. You recognize that every minute spent with someone who does not share your values is a minute stolen from your legacy, and you allocate your presence accordingly. As this habit takes hold, you will notice that your default thought patterns shift to match those of the high performers you have chosen to emulate, that your expectations rise automatically, and that your tolerance for excuses evaporates. This social pressure becomes an asset rather than a burden, the current that carries you forward when your own motivation falters. With your environment and social circle now aligned with your highest aspirations, you must install the daily practices of maintenance that ensure continuous calibration and prevent the slow regression that claims most high achievers. The 9th habit is the systematic examination of consciousness, a daily practice the Stoics called the examination of conscience and modern high performers call the evening review. Every night, before sleep, you conduct a forensic audit of your day, analyzing every decision, conversation, and reaction against the standard of your ideal self. This is not masochistic self-criticism, but strategic pattern recognition, identifying where you violated your principles, where you acted from unconscious reaction rather than conscious choice, and where you missed opportunities to embody your stated identity. You write these observations in a journal, creating an objective record that reveals patterns invisible to memory, which is notoriously unreliable and self-serving. This practice strengthens your metacognitive capacity, the ability to think about your thinking, which is the highest predictor of wisdom and adaptability. You ask 3 questions. What did I do well today that aligns with my highest self? Where did I fall short of my standards? How will I correct this tomorrow? By answering these in writing, you engage the prefrontal cortex in a way that consolidates learning during sleep, transferring insights from short-term to long-term memory while pruning the neural connections that led to error. This ritual also serves as a closure mechanism, preventing the ruminative loops that destroy sleep quality and next-day cognitive function. You signal to your brain that the day is complete, that all loose ends have been acknowledged, that you can surrender to restoration. The Stoics combine this with memento mori, the remembrance of death, not as morbidity, but as clarity. You remind yourself that this day was a gift, that your time is finite and diminishing, that you do not have infinite opportunities to get this right. This urgency burns away procrastination and trivial concerns, focusing you on what actually matters in the limited span of your existence. Without this daily examination, you operate in darkness, repeating errors indefinitely because you never pause to observe them under the light of consciousness. The unexamined life is not worth living, not because examination is inherently valuable, but because without it, you are not truly living at all. You are merely existing, reacting, aging without evolving. The evening review transforms every day into a compressed lifetime, with its own birth, struggle, death, and resurrection, allowing you to iterate faster than competitors who measure progress in years rather than hours. You must be mercilessly honest in this practice, for self-deception here destroys the entire architecture of your development. If you excuse your failures, rationalize your cowardice, or inflate your victories, you create a false map that leads you astray from reality. The power of this habit lies in its capacity to dissolve the ego's defenses, creating a space of radical humility where genuine growth becomes possible. You recognize that you are both the sculptor and the clay, the physician and the patient, the judge and the accused. This paradox requires that you hold yourself to the highest standards while maintaining the deepest compassion, understanding that you are doing the difficult work of neural rewiring that few have the courage to attempt. As you write, you notice the recurring themes, the specific fears that repeatedly sabotage you, the particular context where your willpower fails, and this pattern recognition allows you to design targeted interventions rather than hoping for general improvement. You begin to see yourself as a system to be optimized, a machine to be maintained, a garden to be tended, rather than a mystery to be endured. This mechanistic view of the self is not dehumanizing. It is empowering because machines can be repaired while mysteries remain baffling. You take full ownership of your programming, recognizing that while you did not write the initial code of your childhood conditioning, you are the only one who could debug it now. This ownership is the essence of adulthood and the prerequisite for any genuine success, which brings us to the 10th and final habit that serves as the capstone of this neural architecture. The 10th habit is the contemplation of mortality, the daily practice of memento mori that transforms finite time into infinite urgency. You begin each morning by reminding yourself that you might not survive to see the evening, and you end each night grateful that you were given another day to serve your purpose. This is not morbid fixation, but the ultimate clarifier of priorities. When you truly accept the inevitability of your death, trivia dissolves and essentials emerge with crystalline clarity. The Stoics carried coins stamped with skulls, kept human bones on their dinner tables, not because they loved death, but because they refused to waste life. You must internalize that your time is the only non-renewable resource, that every hour spent in resentment, distraction, or mediocrity is an hour stolen from your legacy. This awareness creates what psychologists call death anxiety transcendence, a state where the fear of dying is converted into the courage to live fully. You ask daily, If this were my last week, what would I create? Who would I love? What would I forgive? Then you act accordingly, collapsing the infinite procrastination of someday into the urgent now. This habit integrates all previous 9 because it provides the why that fuels the how. Without a sense of finite time, discipline becomes masochism, discomfort becomes pointless suffering, and identity becomes costume rather than essence. But with the shadow of the end behind you, every action gains weight and meaning. You recognize that success is not accumulation, but contribution, not the size of your bank account, but the depth of your impact on consciousness itself. You are writing your obituary every single day with your actions, and you resolve that when the moment comes, you will meet death as an old friend, having spent your life completely so that nothing remains but gratitude. This requires that you define your legacy not in terms of fame, but in terms of transformation. Specifically, the transformation you create in others and the example you set for what is possible when human potential is fully actualized. You become the proof that Stoic discipline, modern neuroscience, and ancient wisdom can converge to create a life of unstoppable momentum, serving as a blueprint for those who come after you. This is the ultimate success. Not to die wealthy, but to die complete, having expressed every gift and faced every fear. You visualize your death in detail, feeling the regret of potential unfulfilled, and then reverse engineer tomorrow's actions to prevent that regret from materializing. This is negative visualization used not for anxiety, but for motivational fuel, creating the biochemical impetus to act with full commitment while you still have breath. You practice this not once, but continuously, letting the awareness of impermanence saturate every moment, making the ordinary extraordinary through the recognition of its fleeting nature. The coffee becomes precious when you know it is one of finite number you will taste. The conversation becomes sacred when you recognize it as potentially the last with that person. The work becomes vital when you understand it as your contribution to eternity. This perspective eliminates the petty concerns that consume most people, the status anxieties and trivial rivalries that dissolve in the face of ultimate mortality. You become fearless not because you have no fear, but because you have prioritized what matters and everything else has become background noise. This habit, when fully integrated, creates a human being who is simultaneously fully engaged with life and completely detached from its outcomes, capable of tremendous effort without anxiety about results. You do the work because the work is worth doing, not because you're guaranteed success, and this paradoxically makes success inevitable. As this 10th habit solidifies, you must turn to the integration of all 10 into a coherent operating system that can sustain this level of performance indefinitely. As you install these 10 habits, you must understand that they function as an ecosystem, not a checklist. The discipline of perception allows you to embrace discomfort. The identity reconstruction makes attention monasticism inevitable. The environmental design supports the evening review, and memento mori fuels the entire engine with sacred urgency. You are not adding 10 things to your life. You are replacing your entire operating system with one designed for optimal human functioning. There will be resistance from your old self, the part addicted to comfort and certainty, but that self is dying anyway, moment by moment, and you choose to accelerate that death so that something unstoppable can be born. This is the work of 2026 and beyond. The neural pathways you are building will serve as permanent infrastructure for the remainder of your existence, outlasting careers, relationships, and fortunes, remaining when all else falls away. This is the ultimate investment, the only security in an insecure world, the possession that cannot be stolen, taxed, or destroyed by external events. Your character, forged through these daily practices, becomes your fortress and your weapon, your shield and your compass. When others panic, you will calculate. When others retreat, you will advance. When others complain, you will solve. This is not because you are superior by birth, but because you are disciplined by choice, a member of the self-created elite who have paid the price of admission in advance through discomfort and restraint. You must now make the irrevocable decision to never again return to the shallow waters of unconscious living, to remain forever in the deep current of intentional existence, where every action aligns with every value and every moment serves the legacy you are building. This decision, once made with the full weight of your being, triggers a transformation in the default mode network of your brain that makes regression neurologically uncomfortable, ensuring that progress becomes the path of least resistance. The integration requires that you view setbacks not as failures of the system, but as feedback for its refinement, understanding that even a moment of unconsciousness becomes grist for the mill when examined through the lens of the evening review. You develop what the Japanese call kaizen, continuous improvement, not as a business strategy, but as a way of being, recognizing that perfection is not the goal, but direction is everything. Each habit reinforces the others, creating a flywheel of momentum that becomes self-sustaining after approximately 66 days of consistent practice, the average time required for full neural myelination. You must be patient with the process while being impatient with your effort, giving the biology time to adapt while maintaining the intensity of your commitment. This paradox of patience and urgency creates the tension necessary for growth without the frustration that leads to abandonment. You will find that certain habits come easily while others resist installation, and this resistance marks exactly where your greatest growth lies. Lean into the difficulty, for the neural pathways that are most resistant to change are those that have been most reinforced by years of unconscious repetition, and their transformation yields the greatest returns. As the ecosystem becomes stable, you will experience periods of what feels like superhuman capability, where decisions are effortless, focus is unbreakable, and results seem to flow from the universe itself. These are not aberrations, but glimpses of your true potential. The baseline state you were designed to inhabit before culture and conditioning dulled your edge. Your task is to make this state your new normal, to raise your baseline so that what once seemed extraordinary becomes merely standard. This elevation of baseline is the true definition of transformation, and it prepares you for the final implementation strategies that will ensure these habits survive the inevitable storms of life. You stand now at the threshold of transformation, equipped with the 10 pillars of neural optimization that separate the exceptional from the forgotten. These are not suggestions to be sampled, but commandments to be encoded, laws of biology and psychology that operate with mathematical certainty when obeyed and catastrophic failure when ignored. To implement this system, you must begin with the habit that resists you most strongly, for that resistance marks the location of your greatest leverage. Do not attempt to install all 10 simultaneously. Instead, master one per month, allowing each to become automatic before adding the next. Start with the discipline of perception, as it forms the foundation for all subsequent growth, then layer in the others sequentially until they form an interlocking lattice of behavioral automation. You must create what researchers call implementation intentions, specific if-then plans that remove decision-making from the moment of action. You do not say, "I will work out tomorrow." You say, "When my alarm sounds at 6, I will put on my shoes and step outside." This specificity preloads the decision, reducing the cognitive load and preventing the hesitation that allows resistance to take hold. You must also establish keystone habits, practices that trigger cascades of positive behavior throughout the day. Morning exercise improves diet and focus. Evening review improves sleep and next day planning. By anchoring your new behaviors to existing routines, you leverage the neural pathways already myelinated to build new ones, a technique psychologists call habit stacking. You must prepare for the valley of despair, the period 3 weeks into a new habit when initial enthusiasm fades, but neural pathways are not yet fully formed. This is where most fail, and this is where you must double down, recognizing that the discomfort is proof of transformation, not evidence of futility. You need to create systems of accountability that make quitting more painful than continuing, whether through public commitments, financial stakes, or partnership with others undergoing the same transformation. Track your compliance with religious precision, not to berate yourself for failures, but to reveal patterns in your resistance. You will notice that violations cluster around specific contexts, times of day, or emotional states, and this awareness allows you to design environmental interventions that prevent these triggers from derailing your progress. You must also schedule maintenance days periodically, where you review all 10 habits, celebrate your adherence, and recalibrate any that have drifted. This prevents the slow erosion that occurs when success breeds complacency, the subtle relaxation of standards that precedes collapse. You must treat this not as a program to complete, but as a permanent shift in how you inhabit time and space, a lifelong commitment to self-mastery that ends only when your heart ceases to beat. The year 2026 represents your proving ground, the year you demonstrate to yourself that you are capable of this level of discipline and that the results it produces are real and sustainable. As artificial intelligence displaces cognitive mediocrity and economic volatility punishes the unprepared, these habits become not merely advantageous, but essential for survival and significance. You are choosing to become the kind of human being who thrives in chaos, who creates order from entropy, who serves as a fixed point in a turning world. This is your inheritance and your responsibility. The resistance you feel is not a sign to stop, but a sign that you are exactly where you need to be, at the frontier of your former limitations, pushing against the membrane of your cocoon. Discomfort is the pulse of growth, the feedback that tells you expansion is occurring. You must lean into this resistance with the certainty of physics, knowing that every action taken in alignment with these habits creates ripples that extend far beyond your perception, affecting generations yet unborn through the example you set and the work you produce. You are no longer merely living for yourself. You are living for the principle that human beings can consciously direct their own development, that we are not victims of our genetics or our childhoods, but architects of our destiny. This responsibility is heavy but exhilarating, the proper weight for a fully realized adult to carry. You accept that there will be no finish line, no point where you can declare yourself complete and rest on laurels, because life is motion and cessation is death. Instead, you embrace the eternal becoming, the joyful struggle of continuous improvement, finding satisfaction not in arrival, but in the velocity of your progress. These 10 habits are not tools to use until you succeed. They're the permanent infrastructure of your existence, the scaffolding upon which you build a life that is simultaneously disciplined and wild, focused and expansive, ruthless and compassionate. You have been given the map. The territory must now be walked. Every morning is a new opportunity to vote for this version of yourself, to reinforce the neural pathways of greatness until they become autobahns of instinct. The year 2026 stands before you like unclaimed territory, and you possess the technology of transformation required to colonize it completely. Start now, not tomorrow, not after you finish this video, but in this very moment by deciding that you are no longer available for mediocrity in any form. Close the gap between knowing and doing, between intention and action, between the self you are and the self you must become. The world is waiting for you to be undeniable. You are the stone dropped in the pond, and the ripples you create will touch shores you cannot see. Begin now. Begin with ferocity. Begin with humility. Begin with the absolute certainty that you are capable of greatness and the absolute willingness to do the work required to manifest it. The script is written, the stage is set, the audience is waiting. It is time for you to perform the impossible feat of becoming exactly who you were meant to be. Stand up, step forward. The future belongs to the unstoppable, and you are now among their ranks. Go. Let this be the moment that divides your life into before and after, the decision point that you look back upon as the genesis of everything that followed. You have consumed the knowledge. Now you must embody it. The information means nothing without implementation, the theory nothing without practice, the vision nothing without execution. You are the only obstacle standing between your current reality and the life you desire, and these 10 habits are the tools of your liberation. Use them with the desperation of a drowning man grasping for air, with the gratitude of a believer receiving grace, with the determination of a warrior defending the innocent. Your potential is not something to be protected, but something to be spent completely, poured out in service of your highest calling until every drop is used and only the vessel remains. This is the path of the Stoic, the way of the master, the trajectory of the unstoppable. Walk it with your head high and your heart open, knowing that you are prepared for whatever 2026 and beyond may bring. You have rewired your brain for success, and success is now inevitable. Claim it. The algorithms of your mind have been updated, the architecture of your soul reinforced, the direction of your destiny confirmed. There is nothing left to say and everything left to do. The talking stops here and the doing begins. You are dismissed from the classroom of theory and drafted into the arena of action. Show us what you are capable of. Show yourself. The world turns, the clock ticks, the moment passes. Seize the next one, and the next, until there are no more moments left, and you look back with pride rather than regret. This is your time. This is your year. This is your life. Make it extraordinary. Like this. Subscribe now. Share with someone who needs to hear this. Transform together.